So I was talking about plan Dr. Price had made for me, and just asking, starting with my question ramp up and like getting into the UWorld questions. Do you recommend like starting with like the block that we just finished in school, which for us was cardio-renal, or just attacking those foundational concepts with like the early on path, like those first 3 chapters of Path Elma and then the sketchy videos?
Gotcha. All right, let me just finish typing out your question here. So should you hit the most recent block from classes, or should you hit foundational concepts? So that'd be stuff like Path Elma, sketchy, etc. So there's kind of a couple different thoughts that come through my head with this, and it's going to be a little bit different for depending how far along the journey each student is. And so generally, I always say, so here's rule number 1. Never do questions ahead for what you haven't covered yet in your classes. And that's a really important rule, because a lot of people are going to be like, oh yeah, I want to like get started on the neuro questions because we have neuro coming up next block, or whatever it is. Terrible idea, because you're going to just waste your questions and essentially be scoring 30 to 40% on them. Okay, and so there's a trial that I like you to do. So do a trial first to ascertain where you're at currently. So what you can do in this situation is take 5 blocks of 40 questions, randomized across the topics you've already covered. So all major organ systems, intro, core topics like farm or path or micro, etc. All right, and so that's number 1. Number 2 is after you do that, actually it's probably not clear if I put step 1 and step 2. People are going to think USMLE step 1, USMLE step 2. So I'll say, so first step is that. Second step is if you score less than 55%, you should target via organ system based upon what's highest yield for your exam. Okay, so how do you figure that out? Go to NBME breakdown and see which percentage of topics that you've covered in classes so far yield the most points on your exam. So for example, it's usually going to be cardiology or something like that, right? Cardiology, GI, MSK, especially for the DOs, MSK and neuro are weighted a little bit heavier. But basically you want to see out of which things that you've covered is going to be the highest weighted system for that. And it's tricky for stuff like path and farm oftentimes, is because even if you've had like an intro path class or an intro farm class, you probably haven't covered all of the pathology or all of the pharmacology. You might have just learned about like pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, your half-lives calculations, all that kind of stuff, but you might not have actually been through all of the cardio farm, the renal farm, the respiratory farm, the MSK farm, the DMARDs, all that kind of stuff. And so that's why I like doing the organ systems a little bit better, because if you've covered cardio, you know you've seen the stuff for cardio that you can be tested on. You know what I mean? And anything that shows up in the questions is just something that your school didn't teach you. That's fine, because you still need to know it, but you've done what your school will teach you on that concept, so therefore you should know all of that content. Does that kind of make logical sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. And so here's kind of the caveat. So if you score greater than 55%, take your subsequent question blocks as randomized across all topics you've covered in classes so far, rather than doing it by organ system. That way you have kind of a hard cutoff, and it's not any kind of guesswork or any kind of, well, maybe I should do this for this block or that for that block. It's like, no, you've already met the threshold, so therefore the questions are valuable to you at that point. If you're scoring less than 55%, then that means that overall you're just a little bit too weak of where you need to be. And it's easier to make connections if you go system by system. If you go randomized, you might get a question on Marfan syndrome and then never see Marfan again for another 15 weeks. Whereas if you're doing like the specific systems, you'll be like, okay, here's a heart failure question. Now I got 5 more heart failure questions that are going to be really relevant to each other and I can learn from and make connections quicker. So basically kind of, I want you to think about it like this. If your basis sucks, then you need to make more connections amongst each specific isolated system before you start extrapolating that to be randomized across everything like you would see on the test day. Obviously, this rule changes if you're within 45 to 60 days of your exam, then this goes out the window. You need to be doing randomized always at that point. So there's a couple different like little nuances to it, but that's really the core of what I want for your specific situation of where you're at right now. This is how I would think about it.
Are these, you share these notes afterwards, or should I just like screenshot or something?
No, they'll be shared. So for example, if you go to our members area, classroom, scroll all the way down here, you have the live session recordings and you can see the notes.